Hello friends, welcome to this course on React hooks. We are going to learn React hooks by building a project on weather application. So are there any course requirements or prerequisite? To work on this project, you must have the following skill set. You should have basic knowledge of React and you should have basic knowledge of ES6. Course objective. Participant will be able to implement React hooks concept in current and future projects. What you will learn in this course. We will create a weather application using React hooks. Who are the targeted students? Students with no React hooks experience, front-end developers, anyone who wants to learn React hooks. So by the end of this course, you will have the following skill set. Hands-on regarding practical and real-life scenarios of creating weather application using React hooks. So let's see what are we going to build. So we are going to build this weather application. So if I type Mumbai, and if I click on check weather, so it will display 5 days weather report of Mumbai city. So this is the application which we are going to build. So let's get started. Hello friends, welcome back. So what are React hooks? React hooks are a new addition in React 16.8. They let you use state and other React features without writing a class. In React, we have two kind of components, class component and function components. In the past, class components did the heavy lifting. If we wanted to keep track of certain values by putting them in state, we needed class components. Class components were previously the only kind of components that had state in React. The same applied for interacting with an API. Let's say an external API or a browser API. We needed to use a lifecycle hook like component did mount to reach out to those API, and those are only available with class components. By comparison, function components were important for displaying our markup, and the data stored in state we passed state from class component to render in function components through props, and this function components helped us break our application into more readable and logical component tree. React hooks represent a huge change to React library and how we write React code. Now why is that? The main reason is because we technically no longer need class components anymore. React hooks give to function components all the functionality we previously relied on class component. So this was an introduction on what are React hooks, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Hello friends, welcome back. First, let's create our project. But before we create our project, let's look at the tools which are required for this course. First, we have to install Node.js. You can do this by visiting nodejs.org. As you can see here, there are two versions of Node.js. One of them is LTS, which stands for long-term support. Basically, the LTS version is the stable version of Node.js, and I will recommend that you download this version of Node.js. The other version is current version, and this contains all the latest features, but we won't be needing any of the latest features. So I would recommend that you download this LTS version. Along with that comes npm. npm is the node package manager, and we will need that tool in order to install create react app. In order to download, you need to go to downloads, and if you are a Windows user, you need to click here, and if you are a Mac user, you need to click here. So here is the LTS version and here is the current version. So you need to select this tab, and then you need to click any of these. And the second tool we need is the code editor. I am using Visual Studio Code, so you can download Visual Studio Code from this website code.visualstudio.com. And if you are a Mac user, you need to click on this, and if you are Windows user, you just need to click on this arrow, and here you can find the installation, and it is free to use. And the third tool we need is create react app. It's an npm package which we can bootstrap our react application without zero configuration. So let's install our first project. I have already installed Visual Studio Code, and I have already installed Node.js as well. So let's go to Visual Studio Code. So this is the terminal. Let's say if your terminal is not open, then you need to click on Control and backtick key so you can see this terminal. Now I need to create the project on the desktop. So I'll go to desktop by writing cd desktop, and here I'll create my project by typing npx create react app, and I'll name this app as react hooks. You can give any name you want. Now it will take some time to create this project, so we need to wait a while. So it will install all the packages of React, React DOM, React scripts. So now our project has been created. Now we need to go inside our project folder. So for that we need to write cd react hyphen hooks, the name which we give for this project. Now we need to write npm. So before I write npm start, first we need to go to the folder. So let's open the folder which is at the desktop. So react hooks. I'll just open this. Now we need to open the terminal by pressing Ctrl and backtick key. Now we can type npm start. So we have successfully created our project, but now we need to, I'll remove some files which are not required. Okay, so in source folder I don't require app.cs, so we will remove this file. So let's delete it. App.test we don't require, so let's delete this file as well. Then we don't require index.js, so I'll delete this. I don't require logo.svg, so let's remove that. Now we need to go to app.js and we need to remove the files which we have deleted. So here I'll remove the import, and in index.js we have removed css index.css. Let's save this, and we have removed the logo as well. So in app.js let's remove everything, and let's return a simple div with hello react. Let's save this, and now let's check in the browser. Now as you can see we have printed hello react. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video where we will talk about use state. So I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. The first React hook which we are going to take a look at is called use state. As the name suggests, it will allow us to basically use state inside a function component. Previously, if we wanted to use state, we have to go with a class component. But with React hooks, we can use state in functional component as well. The best way to learn React hooks and to see the difference, how it differs from class component implementation, is to see an implementation of the same component using ES6 classes and then take a look at the implementation of the same component with React hook and the functional component. So in this tutorial, we will follow that approach. Let's begin by creating a simple counter where we will have a button which will keep track of the number of times it has been clicked. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and inside src folder, we will create a new folder with the name components. And in components folder, we will create a file with the name counter class.js. So as we need a class component, I will write RCE and then press a tab. So I'm using an extension which helps me to write this code, which is ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native snippets. So you can install this extension in Visual Studio Code. I've already installed it. So here are the shortcuts to write the code. So you can just have a look and go through it. I'm closing this and I'm coming back to counter class.js. So this is a class-based component. And inside this div, I will take an h1 tag, and here I'll write I was clicked times. Here my variable will come. So let's keep it empty. And now here I'll take a button which says click me. And let's save this. So we will have a state which will have a variable that will show the count, and this button will help to increment the count. So the first thing we need to do is to write a constructor so we can initialize state. So inside this component, we will write constructor which will take one argument props, and inside this curly braces we will write super props, and then we need to set state. So this dot state equals to, now our initial state will set count to be 0. To display this variable, here we need to write in the curly braces this dot state dot count, and we need to close this curly braces. And inside this button tag, we will define a on click event, and this will have a function this dot increment, and we need to define this function. So up here we will define it. So I'll write increment and then an arrow function. So, and inside this curly braces we will set the count. So this dot set state, and inside this parentheses we will take curly braces, and here we will update the count by writing count, which is equal to this dot state dot count plus 1. And let's save this. And now we need to import this counter class in app.js. So let's go to app.js, and here we need to import that component. So import counter class from dot slash component slash counter class, and inside here we need to render it. So counter class, and let's save this, and let's check in the browser. If I click this, it will increment. So let's click this. So now it is incrementing. So let's have a space in between this. So I'll go to counter class, and here I will add a space. Let's save this. Let's go back. So now if I click, this counter has been updating. So it's working fine. Now the question is, how do we implement a counter like this in a function component with the help of React hooks? So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and here inside the component folder, we will create a new file with the name counter hooks, counter hook.js. And I need a functional component, so I will write RAFCE and a tab key. And inside this div, I will write h1 tag, and I was clicked. So here a variable will come. So let's keep it empty. And after that, I'll write button click me. Let's save this, and let's import this component in app.js. So here I will write import counter hook from dot slash component slash counter hook, and here I'll render it. So counter hook, and let's save this and let's go to the browser. Here I have wrote one extra E. So now if I click, nothing happens, it will not work. So let's go to Visual Studio Code. Now if we want to add some state into this component, previously we used to convert it into a class-based component, but we instead use a hook which we have to import, which is called useState from React. So here I will write comma and we will import the hook which is called useState. It's a built-in hook. Okay, when we call useState, we pass an initial value. So here if I write useState, we need to pass an initial value for whatever the thing in this state we are trying to store should be. So if we look at our class component, we have a count which start at 0. So here we will pass 0. So we are going to initialize some value at 0. But this is a function, it's not defined in this component, and it's going to return an array to us with two different items. And we need to initialize these two items using a variable keyword such as const. So here we need to write const, and we need square brackets, and there will be two items. Okay, and here we need to write equal to. So the first thing it return is the piece of state. So we can call that as count, as we did it for class-based component. And the second one, we can call it as set count. So the first one is the piece of state which has an initial value of 0, and the second thing is the function that will update the piece of state. So to display this count, we need to write I was clicked curly braces count. Inside this button tag, we will write on click event. So on click equals to, and now we need a function. So here I'll write increment. We don't require this dot increment. Okay, and then here inside this counter hook function, we can declare this function or we can define this function, but we need to make sure that we are declaring this function with const or some variable keyword. So I'll take const increment equals to an arrow function. So how do we increment our count value from 0? As we know, set count is the function. So let's just try executing it within increment. So here I'll write set count, where we can take the current value, which is count plus 1. Let's save this and let's go to the browser and check. So if I click here, it will increment. So it's working fine. And similarly, if I click here, it will increment. So this was created with the help of class component, and this was created with the help of React hooks. So as you can see, we are able to increment the count and keep track of values and state using useState hook. So this is how we can use useState in React hooks to keep track of values and state. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. In the last video, we have created our basic counter with class component as well as function component. So if you look back to our class component example, you will see that within increment function, we are calling set state, and we are updating the count value according to the current value that we have in the state for count. So it is important to note that set state does not update the component immediately. In every case, for one reason or another, the update may be postponed to a later time. So when we want to read from state, right after calling set state, we might get wrong value. So this dot set state can take two parameters. One parameter is new state variable for state variable, or it can take a function as well. So basically we can pass a function. We can say that previous state, and this updater function can be an arrow function, and that returns an object. So this returns an object where the update made to count is based on the previous state. Now to access the previous value of count, here we need to write previous state dot count plus 1, and this ensures that we always have the correct value for our counter. Let's save this and let's check it in the browser. So if I click here, our counter works. Now let's do this in our function component. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and let's go to our function component. So how do we ensure that we always using the correct value of count? So within every setter function written from use state, we always have access to updater function. So basically we can pass function to set count. So here we can say that previous count, and again we need to write arrow function that will return previous count plus 1. So let's save this and let's go back to the browser and check. So if I click here, this counter works. So the value which we see for a count should always be incremented correctly. That is based on the previous value. So this is important only when the state updates many times in short period of time. But in our case, this is not necessary since we only update the state when we click the button, and we can't click the button so fast that the problem arises. So in our case, this is not required. I'll remove this and I'll keep it as it was before. Okay, and I'll save this. So this was just to show you how we can get previous value by using updater function. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. In this video we will see the difference between this dot set state and the setter function of the state variable written by the use state. The difference is that this dot set state merges the new state with the previous state. So for example, if we have other property next to count and we only pass the count, basically what it does, it merges the previous state and only the count value will be overwritten and the other values will be same as they were in the previous state. While set count will not merge the object, it will just overwrite everything. So it is very important difference and it can lead to big problems if we don't remember this. Let's take a look at this difference. So let's go to counter class component and I will add one more property to the state variable. Let's say we want a light switch. You can turn on and off this light switch. So I will add a state property is on. And let's say at first the switch is turned off. So let's assign false to is on property. Now let's update the new value. But before that, I will change the name of the function to handle click. And I'll copy this and I'll paste it here as well. Because now we are using the same function to increment the count as well as turning the light on and off. Now we will update the new value. If the handle click function is called, we want to switch on the light. So basically, we will change the is on value to be true. So we need to write is on, that will be not this dot state dot is on. So basically we are reversing the value of current is on property. So if it was false, then let's set it to true and vice versa. And down here, I will take one more h1 tag and here we are going to print the is on value. So here we need to take curly braces and here we need to say this dot state dot is on. If this value is true, then we need to print on. Otherwise, we need to print off. Let's close the curly braces and let's save this file. And we can simply destruct the values from the state variable. So here we can say const count and is on equals to this dot state. So instead of this dot state, we can write is on. And here I'll remove the previous state, and here also I'll remove previous state, and we can write only count plus 1. Let's save this file. Now let's check it in the browser. So let's go to the browser, and if I click here, let's refresh this file. So now as you can see, it is first the value is off and we have 0 count. If I click this, now this is on and the counter has been incremented to 1. Now it is off and it is incremented to 2. So it is working fine. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code and we need to implement the same functionality in counter hook component. Before we implement the same functionality as we did in counter class component, I'll show you something. Let's go to counter class component, and here also we can destructure this value. So here we need to write const, and in curly braces we will write is on, and second value is count, which is equal to this dot state. Let's save this, and here we can remove this dot state. Similarly, here we can remove this dot state. Let's save this and let's go back to the browser and check. So let me refresh this, and if I click here, it should work. So now it is working fine. So this makes the code clean and clear. So let's go back to the counter hook component and let's implement the same functionality which we have done for counter class. But before that, I will comment this line. This we will require later on. Now let's call the useState function. So I'll call useState function, and here we need to pass the initial state. So initial state is same as we have in the class component. So let's go to counter class component, and I'll copy this initial state, and I'll come back to counter hook component and I'll paste it here. Then as you know, it returns an array. So we will return an array. So we can destructure the array using ES6 destructuring functionality. So we can say state and set state. And here we need to assign it to a variable keyword. So we'll take const. And then I will change the function name of increment to handle click, because now we are using the same function to increment the count as well as turning the light on and off. And I'll copy this function and I'll paste it here. And inside the handle click function, let's destructure is on and count the same way we did it in our class component. So here I'll write const, and in the curly braces I'll write is on, and the second value is count equals to state, because we are going to destructure is on and count from the state variable. So that's why I've written state, not this dot state. Okay. Now this will be an object. So we need to write curly braces, and here also we need to end this with the curly braces, and here count, which will be count plus 1. And the second value is on, that will be not is on. And this will be set state. So instead of set count, I'll write set state. And here we need to take the h1 tag the same way we did it for class component. And here I will write, let's copy this line from here. So I'll just copy this, and here I'll paste it. Let's save this file. So we are getting some error, is on is not defined. Okay, here I need to write is on. Let's save this file. So here also we need to destructure the value. So const is on and count, which is going to equal to state. Let's save this, and now let's go to the browser and check. First it will be off and the counter will be 0. Once I click, you can see it is switching on and off and the counter is incrementing. So it is working fine. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. So as you can see, we can pass an object to the useState function as well. But I wanted to show you that how setState and this dot setState differs. So let's go to counter class component, and let's remove the count update functionality from here, and let's save this file, and let's go to the browser and let's refresh the page. So if I click this button, now as you can see, it still remains 0 because we don't update the count, so it won't increment. Now what happens if I remove the count increment from our hook components? So let's go to Visual Studio Code and let's go to counter component, counter hook component, and let's remove this update functionality of count, and let's save this, and let's go to the browser. Let me refresh once. Now let's see what happens. Now if I click this button, the value disappears. So why it disappeared? It disappeared because it won't merge the previous state with this object. It overwrites everything. So basically the new count state variable will be undefined, and this is why you can't see anything here. But in our ES6 class component, it basically merges the previous state where the count is 0 and override this property, and it will still keep the count property as 0. But how it works in our counter hook component, if we call set state, it will override the whole object. And it is very important to remember, because as you can see, we are going to lose information because the setter function returned by the useState won't merge, but it will update the whole object. So this is very important thing to remember. So this is the thing which I wanted to show you, and this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. In the previous video we have discussed the difference between this dot set state and the setter function returned by the useState React hook. There is one great problem that comes from the fact that the setter function does not merge but replaces the state. What if we have 10 properties on the state object? That would mean that every time we set the state, we have to pass 10 properties here. Otherwise, they would just disappear. We can fortunately create multiple state variable using useState. So basically, we can separate different parts of state into its own variable. We can do that by calling useState multiple times. So let's see an example for that. Let's say we want to extract count and is on to its own state variable. So basically count will remain the same as it was in the beginning. And we are going to have a new state variable is on, which contain is on. That is why I said in the previous video that we shouldn't remove this, because we are going to need this. Let's uncomment this and let's comment this code. We are not going to use this code. Let's call useState function that will return an array, and we can destruct this array with a new state variable, and let's name it as is on, and the setter function will be set is on, and we need to assign it to a variable keyword. So let's write const, and the initial value of is on variable will be false. Now useState is called twice in our functional component, and basically React will create two state variables. And it is very important that this two state variable will be totally independent from each other. So if we call set is on, we will set the is on state variable, but we won't touch the count state variable. Now let's update the handle click function as well. So let's remove this entire code. First we want to toggle is on state variable. So let's call set is on, and we need to set it to not is on. Basically, we are reversing the toggle function. If it is false, it will be true, and if it is true, it will be false. Now let's call the count function. So set count, and we will set the count variable to count plus 1. Let's save this file, and let's remove this. We don't require this because now we are not using an object in the initial value. So let's remove this. Let's save this and let's check in the browser. And let me refresh once, and if I click here, it will behave the same. So as you can see, it behaves the same as it was before, but the implementation differs because now there will be two state variable. Let's see that in React DevTools. So right click, inspect, and we need to click on components. And here, as you can see, there are two state variables. So if you are not using React DevTools, you just need to go to Google and search React DevTools. And you can install it in your Chrome browser. Okay, I have already installed it. So in this way, you can see there are two different states, and these two states are totally independent from each other. Let me close this. So if you want to update one, it won't touch the other one. So basically, we have to update them independently. This is why it is very good, because they are independent. We can separate concern by creating multiple state variables. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Till then, take care and bye-bye. Hello friends, welcome back. The next React hook which we are going to take a look is called use effect. Use effect hook lets you perform side effects in function components. So what are side effects? It means that a function or expression changes some state that is outside of its scope. In React, side effects are like calling an API, logging, or subscribing to listeners. If we take a look at our class component, how we did side effect, we do it by writing code in component did mount and component did update. And we clean up this effect in component will unmount. We should not perform any side effect inside the render function because it leads to inconsistency of UI. There are two kind of side effect in React. There are side effects which require a cleanup. For example, if you set a time interval that needs to be cleaned up. If you submit a socket event, then it needs to be cleaned up as well. And there are side effects which don't require a cleanup. For example, if you just log something or if you just perform an API call, after that you can basically just forget about this effect. So first we will take a look at the effects that don't require a cleanup. So we will modify the document title when the isOnState property gets toggled. So basically we always want to show the isOn value in the document title. So let's go to counter class component. So when React mounts, our counter class component will call component did mount. So here we need to write component did mount. So when this function gets called, we can say that document dot title, which is equal to this dot state dot is on. And when we click the button, then React will call the render function. Then it will call component did update. And when the function get called, we can say that document dot title, which is equal to this dot state dot is on. Let's save this and let's check it in the browser. Let me refresh this page. As you can see, document.title has been updated, and if I click this button, it changes. So this is how we perform side effect in class component. We have to use component did mount and component did update. So when React mounts this component, component did update won't run. Only component did mount runs. That is why we have to put this code here as well. Otherwise, in the first render, we won't be able to see the false value in document title. So the problem is that we are duplicating the code. So we have the same code in different functions. In React, if we wanted to perform a side effect after the first render, then we have to use component did mount. Otherwise, we can use component did update. So basically, we have to use both the functions. Now let's implement the same functionality in counter hook component. So let's go to counter hook component, and here we need to import use effect hook. So use effect. Use effect hook is also a function, so we can call it. So let's call it here use effect. And use effect hook requires a function which will be executed by React after the DOM has been updated. So we have to pass a function to use effect function. So let's pass an arrow function. We can say that document dot title, which is equal to is on. Let's save this. And then we need to go to counter class component and we need to comment component did mount and component did update. Let's save this and let's go to the browser. Let me refresh. So if I click here, nothing happens because we have commented component did mount and component did update. But if I click here, you can see the document title has changed. So let's see what use effect does. Using this hook, you can tell React that your component need to do something after every render. So you pass a function to use effect function and React will call this after the DOM has been updated. It is guaranteed by React that the DOM has been updated before calling the use effect function. And as you can see, the use effect function is inside the counter hook component, so we can access all the variable defined by useState hook as well. So it is important to know that useEffect function runs after every render, even after the first render. So to show you, I will just console log first render. And if I save this and if I go to the browser and let's inspect and let's go to console. So here as you can see, this is the first render. If I click this button, this component re-render and use effect will run. So let me click this button. So use effect ran and as you can see, it logged our first render again. Once I click again, so it will re-render the component and we can see the log. So whenever you click the button, our component re-render and use effect will run. This means that every time React render, a new anonymous function will be passed to use effect, which might be totally unnecessary. If you think about it, that is on hasn't changed yet, then there is no point in creating a new anonymous function and passing it to use effect. Later on, we are going to take a look at how to avoid this problem because this can lead to a performance issue. So let me remove this. I just wanted to show you that use effect runs on every re-render. So let me save this, and this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. In the previous video, I have told you that on each render, a new effect function is created and executed after the DOM has been updated. Since our counter component updates only when we click our button, let's try to move the count increment to the effect function. We can do that because if we update the isOnState variable here, then it will trigger a re-render, which means that the effect function will get executed after the DOM has been updated. So let's move this set count inside the use effect function and let's see what we have. Let's save this file and let's go to the browser. As you can see, it is incrementing continuously. Why does it happen? As we know, React re-renders the component when the state changes. Since we are updating the state in our useEffect function, so basically it's an infinite loop. So what we want now is we want our effect to run only if the isOnState variable changes, because that's when we want to run our effect function so that it can update the document title plus the count. So how can we achieve that? The useEffect hook can actually take a second argument as well, which is an array. So it takes not only the function, but it can also take a second parameter. The second parameter will be an array of variables which it should consider when it decides if it should execute this function or not. So how it works basically, it looks at the content of the array and compare the previous array, and if any of the values specified in the array changes compared to the previous value of the array, then it execute this effect function. If none of them changes, then it won't execute. So in the array, we want to put is on, because as you can see here, the ESLint also give us suggestion. React hook use effect contains a call to set count without a list of dependency. This can lead an infinite change of update. To fix this, pass is on count as a second argument to use effect hook. Let me minimize this. So ESLint gives us suggestion and it knows that we have to look at is on value. So that's why I've added is on value here. And let's save this file and check it in the browser. Now you see that it won't update continuously. So let's see how it works. Now when there is an initial render, the document title is updated and set count is called. That is why you can see 1. So this is an issue which we will resolve later. And when it updates the count, it will re-render the component. So a new function will be passed to the useEffect function and an array which contain is on. So it will check the previous is on value which was false, that was the initial value, and new value which is still false. So it sees that false and false is not different, so React won't execute the effect function. But there is one problem now. We have this value 1. Why did it happen? Because the effect runs on the first render as I told you in the previous video. So this effect behaves as a component did mount and component did update together. So it increment the count. The easiest solution to this problem is to have an if condition. So here we need to write if count equals to 0 and is on is not true, means is on is false, then simply return. So this happens only on the first render. After that, when we click our button, the set is on will be true. So basically this if will never be true, so it will never return. Let's save this file and let's check it in the browser. Now you can see our count is 0. So let's go to the Visual Studio Code, and if you can see, so as you can see, React complains that this effect has another dependency of count. But we will not fix this now because we know that count won't get updated by itself, because we only increment the count when the set is on is called. So let's ignore this warning. Now, how can we achieve component did update? So how can we achieve the functionality of component did mount only? As I said before, this effect is basically both component did mount and component did update. So what if I want to do something only after the first render? For example, just to call an API, how can we do that? I don't want to call API on each render. So in that case, we can create a new use effect. So here I will create a new use effect function, and inside I will pass an arrow function, and I'll just write console.log first render. And here if we pass an empty array, and let's save this file. So this is how we can achieve the functionality of component did mount. Because on the second render, React will compare the previous value of empty array, which is 0 element, basically the new array which is still empty array. So React sees that none of the element change, it won't execute this effect function. So this is how we can achieve component did mount, and we don't have to put anything inside the second argument. So that's basically component did mount and component did update. In our case, we can pass is on state variable here, that will be component did mount, and sometime component did update when the is on state variable changes. Now let's save the file and check it in the browser, and let me inspect, and let's go to console. So here as you can see, first render, and if I click this button, the state changes but the effect does not run. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. In this video, we are going to take a look at the effects which requires a cleanup. But before that, I want to rectify this code in use effect. This if condition should come after document.title, because as you can see in the browser, we can't see false value in document.title because this if condition is at the start. If we remove this, and if I paste it here, and if I save it, then if I go to the browser, as you can see the false value, and the count value is also 0. Now if I click this, count value incremented and this becomes true. So this was an error, and we need to remove one more warning. So here as you can see, in counter class, count is assigned a value but never used. So let's go to counter class, and as you remember, we have removed the count from here, so we need to add it count, which will be count plus 1. Let me save this. Now as you can see, the warning has gone, but we can't remove this warning because in our example, if we add count here, it means that this effect will be created again if the count changes, and when the count changes, it triggers a re-render, which means we are going to increment the count again. So it will basically be an infinite loop. So if I save this, the warning will go, but if I go to the browser and if I click this button, so you can see the count is incrementing continuously. So this is why we can't add count here. And as you can see, we have two use effect hooks. This is the first one and this is the second one. We have one in which we log when the component get mounted. So I am talking about this effect here. We have another effect which has to do with the is on state variable. If this is on state variable changes, we do a couple of things in this effect. As you can see, we are separating concerns, but in our class component, we would need to put document title equals to is on and console log first render in the component did mount function, which would mean that basically we are putting unrelated code into the same function, which is not a good pattern. It is important to note that the effects will run in the order they were created. So first this effect and then this effect will run. It is very important. Sometimes we write the effect which needs to be cleaned up. For example, if we start a timer, we have to clear the interval, or who subscribe to listener, we have to unsubscribe to avoid memory leak. We did the cleanup part in our class components, usually in the component will unmount function and sometimes in the component did mount as well. With React hook, it is very easy to do the cleanup. We just have to return a function from our effect function, and that return function will be executed by React when a new effect gets applied or when the component unmounts. So let's see an example. Let's create another effect. So let me give some space, and here we need to create a new effect, and inside we'll take one arrow function, And it is very simple. We just console log effect start and let's return a function. So here let's return a function which is the cleanup function. So this function will be executed by React, and this cleanup function we are going to say console.log cleanup. Let's save this file and let's go to the browser and let's inspect and let's go to the console. So here as you can see it prints first render because of this effect. And as you can see, first render was printed first and then effect start. It is because React applies effect in order they were created. So first this effect and then this effect will run. Now, if we click on this button, you can see cleanup, effect start, cleanup, effect starts. Why did cleanup appear twice? It appeared twice because first React triggers a re-render because we are setting the is on state variable, and then it triggers a re-render again because we are updating the count. That's why you can see cleanup and effect start twice. As you can see, React cleans up the effect when a new effect is applied or when the component get unmounted, which in our case when I close the tab. Now let's go back to Visual Studio Code and let's go back to our second effect, this one. This gets printed when the component mount. As we are passing an empty array here, so this is how we can guarantee that this effect will run only once when the component mounted. So basically this is equivalent to component did mount. And how can we achieve the functionality of component will unmount with React hooks? Well, it is very simple. We just have to return a function. So here we will return a function which has a dependency of an empty array. This will equivalent to component will unmount. So if we return a cleanup function in this effect which has an empty array dependency, then it means that the cleanup will run when the component gets unmounted. So this is how we can achieve component will unmount functionality with our React hook. Let's save this. Now let's see a real world example for the cleanup. Let's say every second I want to print is on state variable value to the console. So let's create a new function, and inside this we will take an arrow function, and the dependency of this effect will be is on state variable. So here we need to write an empty array. Inside the empty array we will pass is on state variable. So when this is on state variable changes, that's when I wanted to create a new effect. So let's create an interval called const timer, which is equal to set interval, and this interval is quite simple. It just prints the state variable is on. So we can console log is on, and it runs every second. So we need to pass 1000 milliseconds. So here I will pass 1000 milliseconds. Let's save this. Now we have to clean up after this, since that would cause a memory leak if we forget to clean up after this. How we can clean up? So we can return a function. So here we need to write return, and then we need to take an arrow function. So we can return a function which will be called by React, and in this function we just clear the interval. So here we need to write clear interval, and then we need to pass the ID timer which is written by the set interval function. So now let's save this and let's go to the browser and check. So here as you can see that the is on gets printed here, and if I click on this button you can see that the is on change and now the new value gets printed. So we will look at why this dependency is so important. If I remove this dependency, two things will happen. First, ESLint will show me a warning, React hook use effect has a missing dependency is on. It complains because even if is on changes, there will be no new effect applied. So basically the side effect of the old effect are still present. Because we started the timer even though is on state variable change, it won't update the effect. So that will mean that old value of is on variable will get printed. So let's save this and let's go back to the browser. Let's refresh this. As you can see, is on value has been printed, and if I click this button, it will still show me the old value, which is false. So this is not really good. Why did it happen? It happened because, as I said in the previous video, when React comes here, it checks this effect has an empty array dependency. So let's take the element of this array to the previous array, and it says okay, it does not have any element, so basically nothing has changed. So it won't apply this new effect. And because of the closure functionality in JavaScript, the is on will refer to the old value, which is false. So it will refer to this old value, which is false. So this is why we are saying that is on is still false, even though this is true. You can see this is true, but here it is showing false. So this is very important that we always specify all the dependency here. So if I specify is on and save it now, let's specify a dependency and save it. And now let's go to the browser. And now you can see is on value is printed as false. And if I click this, now the value is true. So this is very important. So if you don't specify all the dependency here, then it might happen that your side effect refers back to the previous value, which can lead to inconsistency. So this is very, very important. So this is how we have completed the use effect. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. Let's look at how we can fetch data in React. In our example, we will have a users component that will fetch some data and show the names of the user in the list. So we will be using JSON placeholder to fetch our data. So if you scroll down, here you can see they have couple of APIs which can be used to fetch some data. We will be fetching the users. So we are going to download this data. So basically it's a JSON array with 10 users. We will print the names of users. So let's get started. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and here we need to create a folder in components folder. So here I'll create a folder fetching, and inside fetching I'll create a new file with the name users class.js, and this is a class component. So I will write RC E and press tab, and here I will give a caps for user class. Let's copy this and I'll paste it here as well. Now to add, we need to add a constructor. To add a constructor, there is a shortcode RCONST. Okay, and here we need to add a property users which is set to null. Let's save this, and we can extract the user property from state variable. So here we need to write const users equals to this dot state. Let's save this file, and here we need to add a condition. If the user does not exist, then return a simple div with no users, and if the user exists, then return unordered list, which is UL, and inside this we will map the users. So curly braces, and here we need to write users dot map, and inside map we will take an arrow function which will return li list item, and here we need to write the variable name, which is you can take any name you want, and here we need to print the users, so u dot name, and then we need to specify a key. So as you can see, if we go to the URL, if we go to this JSON placeholder website, so this is the name which we are going to print, and this is the ID which we can use as a key. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and to access the key, we need the ID, we need to write u.id. Let's save this, and now we need to fetch the API, and now we need to make an API call. So we usually put the side effect to component did mount. So here I will write component did mount, and inside this we will use the built-in fetch API method. So fetch, so this built-in fetch API requires a URL. So this is the URL which we required. So let's copy this in single quotes. Inside this we will need to paste it. Then we have to extract the JSON body, which we can do by calling the response JSON function. So here we need to write then, and inside this we will take an arrow function, and here we need to write j dot JSON. So this is the function. So this is the JSON function. And then we want to set the state. So we can call then, and here we need to write users, an arrow function. So we need to set the state. So this dot set state, and here we need to write users. Let's save this file. And now we need to import this component in app.js. So let's go to app.js, and here we don't require this. And here also we need to remove this. And let's import the user component. So users class from dot slash component slash fetching slash users class, and here we need to write users class. Let's save this file and let's check it in the browser. So here you can see, so as you can see here, all the names are been printed. So this is how we can fetch data from API in Classroom. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. Let's implement the same component using React hooks and functional components. So let's create a new file inside fetching folder. So I'll create a new file and I'll name it users hook.js. And as this is a functional component, so I will write RAFCE and press tab. Now we need to import use state from React. So here I need to write use state. Let's call use state. So here we need to write use state, and we need to pass an initial value. So we will pass initial value as null, and this use state will return an array with two elements. So the first one is the state variable, so we can name it as users, and the second variable is the setter function, so we can name as set users. And then we need to assign it to a variable keyword, so we will assign it to const. Let's save this file, and we need to implement the same functionality as it is here. So here we can say if user does not exist, then return a div with no users. And if the user state variable exists, then we need to return a UL, an unordered list, and inside this we will map the users. So we will take a map method to add the to show the users. So users dot map, and inside we need to take an arrow function, and here we need to take the argument which is u, and to print the name of the users u dot name, and here we need to pass the key. So key which will be u dot id. Let's save this file. Now we need to import this component to app.js. So let's go to app.js, and here we need to write import users hooked from component slash fetching slash users hook. And here we need to render it out. So users hook. Let's save this file. Let's save this file and let's check it in the browser. Right now you will not see anything because we have not added the data fetching functionality. So let's go to the Visual Studio Code, and we need to go to usershook.js, and now let's implement the data fetching functionality. So for that we need to import use effect. So here we need to write use effect. Let's create our first effect. So here we need to write use effect, and inside we need an arrow function. And let's go to users class.js, and the functionality is same, so we just need to copy this code and we need to paste it here, and instead of this dot set state we need to write set users, and here we need to write users. Let's save this file, and here we need to pass the dependency as an empty array in the second argument, so it will be like component did mount. Now this use effect will run only once on the first render. Now if I save this file and if I go to the browser, you can see our list has been printed. So this is how we implement the same functionality as we did in our class component. Now let's move further and let's add error handling as well. So let's go to Visual Studio Code and let's create another state variable, and we are going to call this as error, and the setter function will be set error, which is equal to use state, and the initial value will be null. So if there is an error, it goes to catch block, and here inside we need to pass an arrow function. So when the promise reject, then we can set the error and pass the error object. Now let's save this file. So we need to remove this and let's save this. And if I go to the browser, you will not see anything. But what if I do a typo error in the URL? So let's remove this dot. So basically, if the error object is populated, then we can say that if error exists, then simply return a div with error. Let's save this, and now let's go to the browser and check. So as you can see, this error message has been printed. Now let's say we also wanted to show the users when the fetching is still in progress when the component is loading. So let's create another state variable. So here we need to write const. So the variable name will be is loading, and the setter function will be set is loading, which is equal to use state, and the initial value will be false. Initially, we will not load anything. So when do we want to set this loading to be true? When we start our fetching, basically before that. So before this fetching, we will write set is loading to be true. Let's save this. So when we receive a response here, we can basically say set is loading false to be false. And here we need to close the curly braces. Let's save this file because we have not finished downloading our data. That's why we need to put it as false. And when there is an error, we also want to call set is loading to be false. So set is loading, we need to set it to false. And here we need to close the curly braces. Let's save this. We have set it to false because we are not downloading any data. So now if there is no user, then basically we can check is loading state variable value, and if this is true, then we can return a div saying loading. Otherwise, we just return no user. And let's add a dot here because we have removed it to show the error, but now we need to add this dot. Let's save this and let's go back to the browser. Here you can see the data because it loaded very fast. So how we can check we have very slow connection. So let's open, uh, let's inspect this, and let's go to network tab, and here we need to select slow 3G, and then we need to refresh the page. So once I refresh the page, now you can see, you will able to see that this data has been loading. Okay, and now all the data is here. So we can go back, and now we can make the connection as it is. So this is how you can check the loading. So now we have seen an example how to execute API calls in a functional component with React hooks. And we also added some additional state. So this is it for this video, and in the next video we are going to create a very first React hook. So I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. In the previous video, we have fetched some data in our user's hook component. Let's assume that we have another component. In that another component, we want to fetch a different API. For example, we want to fetch photos. So if we want to fetch the photos in the same component, we also have to define a state for photos, a state for error, and a state for is loading. And we have to call our fetch function again, and we have to call fetch function in a different effect, and then we have to define an effect function as well. where we call our API. So what that means is that we are duplicating most of the code in two components. We have the same code in two components. This is something we never like in programming because it will be harder to maintain. So how can we resolve this problem? We can resolve the problem by outsourcing the data fetching part of our application. We can create a custom hook which takes a URL and it fetches the data and then return this state variables. So let's see how we can achieve this functionality. Let's create a new file in fetching folder. So I'll create a new file and I'll name it as use fetch.js. And here I will type rafce. And in this function, we need to pass URL. And then let's go to usershook.js and let's copy this code and let's paste it here. Since this useFetch component will be a generic data fetching component, so let's remove this and let's rename it to data. And here we need to write the setter function as set data. And we can keep the error and is loading as it is. Now let's go back to users hook and let's copy this use effect function. And here we need to paste it. In this use effect, we are keeping the same functionality except we have to replace this URL to URL. Users will be data and here also users will be data and set users will be set data. And now let's return the state variables. So here I'll remove this and I'll return variables as data, error, and is loading. Let's save this. Now let's go back to users hook component and here we need to import use fetch. So import use fetch from use fetch. And in use fetch, here we need to import use state and use effect. Let's save this file and let's go back to users hook and we need to simply call use fetch and we need to pass this URL. So I'll just copy this and I'll paste it here. Since this use fetch takes URL as a parameter, so that is the reason we have to pass this URL here in this function. Now we can remove this code. We don't require this. And as you know that use fetch function returns data error and is loading, so we can destruct here. So const user data error and is loading. And in the context of our users hook component, data is user. So basically we can rename this as users. Let's save this and as you can see, we don't have to change anything in our render part because everything is basically the same. We just outsourced the fetching logic to its own component, which is use fetch. So this will be a React hook. So now we can remove this dependencies, which we don't want this. Let's save this and let's go back to the browser. And as you can see that we see the same things. So now let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And as you can see, we have a warning React hook use effect has a missing dependency URL. So now if the URL changes, then this effect won't run because it is not listed in the dependency. So here we can add the dependency as URL and let's save this file. So now you can see that warning has gone. So let me minimize this. So how this use fetch basically works. So when we mount our users hook component, we will call use fetch as well. This function gets called and the fetching basically start when we pass the URL here. When the data is ready, the user hooks component update. Since its state changes, but the fetching won't happen again as we pass an empty array. But if we pass the URL, the data fetching happens and basically the state variable will be set. And from that all, we can read this read this state variables. If the state variable changes here, then this component will also get re-rendered since it is using the state variable of use fetch component. So it is very important to know that if we use this use fetch in different component, then that will be totally independent from each other. So if we call use fetch multiple times, even in different components, it will return different data error and is loading variable. So it is very important. So we have successfully implemented our first custom hook. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. In this video, we are going to start off with our weather application. First, we will create a very clean project. For that, let's open a new window. So to open a new window, we need to click on Files and then click on New Window. And let me close this. So we need to open the terminal. So to open the terminal, we need to press Control and backtick key. Backtick key is above the tab key. So once we open the terminal, then here we need to write np. Sorry, I need to create a folder on my desktop. So let's go to desktop, and I'm now inside my desktop. Now let's create the project. So npx create react app, and the name of my application will be weather app, and I press enter. So it will take some time to create the project. So it will install all the packages like React, React DOM, and React script. So now our project has been created. Now let's go to the folder. So for that we need to open folder, click on open folder, and I have created the project at my desktop. So weather app, and let's click open. Now again we need to open the terminal. So control and backtick key, and here I'll write npm start. Okay, so we have started the project. So before we start working on our project, let's open a new tab, and here we need to go to openweather.org. Sorry, openweathermap.org. Open weather map. So we need to go to openweathermap.org, and this is the API which we are going to use to fetch the real weather data. Now we need to click on API, and here we need to select 5 days forecast. So we need to go to API documentation. So basically with this API, we can get access to next 5 days weather for specified city. So this is the example. If you scroll down, so let me check the examples. Okay, so this is the examples. Let's copy this URL and open a new tab, and we need to paste it here. And instead of city name, I will add the city name as Mumbai. I want the data for Mumbai city. Okay, and let's remove the app ID, and let's hit enter. So it says that invalid API. Even though this weather API is free, but we still need an API key. So this is how they know the request is coming from us. So how to get an API key? So we need to sign up. So if I click here, I am already signed in because I have registered it. Okay. So if you have not registered, then let me go to open weather map. Let's copy this URL, and I'll open this in a incognito window, and I'll paste it. So if you click on sign in, so you will end up on this page. Then you need to create an account. So you need to create your account by filling this form. Once you create an account, let me close this. I've already created this account. So that is the reason it is showing me that you are already signed in. So once you create an account, then you will get a message here. Then we need to, once I click on sign in, so you will land up on this page. Then you need to click on API keys. So this is the API key which I'm going to use. You need to register and you need to get your own API key. Please don't use my API key because I'm going to delete this after the project is complete. So you need to register and get your own API key and you need to use it. It's totally free. Don't have to pay anything. So now let's copy this API key and let's go back to the URL, and here we need to write and app ID, which is equal to the API key which we have copied. And if I hit enter, now it gives me some JSON data. So this is a JSON data. And now if we go to API documentation, the first thing that I want to tell you is that the weather data which we are getting is an imperial system. And since I am from India, I'll be using the metric unit system. So I'm just going to specify another query parameter here in this URL. So the parameter will be and units equals to metrics, and then I'll hit enter. So if you are from United States or a country which uses the imperial unit system, then you don't have to do this. Now let's format this code. So let's copy this code and I'll go to a new tab, and here I'll search for JSON formatter. And this is the first link which we need. And here I need to paste the code, and let's click on process. So once you click process, here you will get a formatted JSON data which look much nicer than this one. We have a lot of information here. Let's check what we have. So here, as you can see, it shows country, India, city, we have ID. Okay. Okay. City, the name of the city is Mumbai. So we have latitude, we have longitude, and all this kind of stuff. Now we have one more thing which I wanted to show you is, and then we have this main. In that we have temperature minimum, temperature maximum, and we have DT, which is basically the Unix timestamp of the day. Then we have sea level, ground level, humidity. There is a lot of stuff. There's temperature. So you can also see that we have weather property where you can see we have icon. So we will be using icon. So what is this icon? As you can see, it says 10D. So what is this? If we go back to weather API, so let's go back to weather API. And if I click on API, and if I go back to API docs, so if I scroll down, so here you can see list of weather condition codes. So let's click on this, and here are all the images. So as you can see, there are a lot of images, but what image we have saw is that 10D. So if I click here on this URL, so this is the image URL 10D. So this is the icon. So we can use this image to show in our application as well. So how can we use this image? So we can use this image by using this URL, and we don't need any API key. So we are quite lucky for this. So as you can see, this picture, this icon represent the current weather in Mumbai. So using this API, we will be able to access 5 days weather data, and using this API, we'll be able to access the minimum and maximum temperature of the next 5 days. And we will have a very beautiful icons here. So we can use in our application to make it a bit nicer. So this is all about Open Weather API. So this is something we are going to use in our application. We are going to make calls to this Open Weather API. Now let's head back to Visual Studio Code, and let's open the SRC folder, and we will do some cleanup. So the files which we don't require is logo.svg. So let's delete this file. Then index.css, we don't require index.css. So let's delete this as well. Let's delete app.test.js. So let's delete this as well. Now in app.css, let's keep this as it is. I will overwrite some CSS. Okay, so let's keep it. Now let's go back to index.js, and here we need to delete this URL, this import file, because we have deleted this file. So I'll remove this. Then let's save this. Then let's go back to app.js, and here we need we need to delete this logo because we have removed the logo. Then let's remove the entire div and let's return a simple div which says hello weather app. Let's save this and let's check it in the browser. So you can see hello weather app has been printed. And before we close this lecture, let's go back to Visual Studio Code and I'll create one folder as config. And in this folder, I'll create a new file with the name index.js. And here I'll make two variables. So first will be the for the API key. So const and the name will be API key, which is equal to, and let's copy the API key from here. So if I go to API, okay, this is the last. Let me go to API. No, let's click on sign up, sign in, and let's go to API keys. So this is the API key which I want. So let's copy this. Let's go to Visual Studio Code and let's paste it here. And we need to export this so we can import it in other components. And then we need to, let's save this. And then we need one more variable. So let's export that const and we need a base URL. So base URL. So what is the base URL? So the base URL is, let's go back to home page. So the base URL is this open, no, not this one. The base URL is this api.openweathermap.org. So let's copy this and let's paste it here and let's save this file. So this is it. We have set up our project. This is it for this lecture and I'll see you in the next video. Till then, take care and bye-bye. Hello friends, welcome back. Now as we have set up our project, let's start and create our first component. So if we come back here and let's look at the data which is written by OpenWeather API, you can see that the minimum and maximum temperatures are written. The main description of the current weather is also written. There is an icon and these are the data basically which we are going to show to the user. A very first component will be component where we show these weather information. So we are going to show the main weather. Above the main weather, we are going to show the icon and also the date plus minimum and maximum temperatures. We will be using React Bootstrap. So if you go to a new tab and write React Bootstrap, so this is the first link which we need. So if I click on get started, so this is how we can install React Bootstrap. So let's copy this line and let's go to Visual Studio Code and we need to come to the terminal. To stop the terminal, we need to press Ctrl C and here we need to paste the line. So now React Bootstrap has been installed. Now let's go to the React Bootstrap website and if I scroll down, because we also have to include this CSS as they state here, the style sheet is required, but they don't include any CSS. This is why we have to include this CSS manually. So let's copy this CSS and let's go back to Visual Studio Code and we need to click on public folder and in let's go to index.html and after this manifest we need to paste the URL which we have copied. Let's save this. So now we are ready to use Bootstrap. Now we can start building our first component. So inside the source folder, let me close this. So inside the source folder, I will create one more folder with the name components. And inside our component, let's create the first component which is weather card.js. So this will be a kind of card which will show the weather data. This is our simple functional component. This component will receive some props and just display it. If you go to Bootstrap website and if you click on components and you need to click on cards. So we can use this card component because it gives some very nice styling to our card. So we don't have to write much CSS in this project. So now let's copy this code and let's go back to Visual Studio Code And as this is a functional component, so I will write RAFCE, and here we need to pass props, and here I'll paste the code which we have copied. So we don't require card.text, so let's remove this, and we don't require the button as well, so let's remove this as well. Let's save this, and we need to import card from bootstrap, react bootstrap. So import card from react bootstrap, and let's save this file. Now let's go to our JSON and see what we have. So we want to show the minimum and maximum temperatures for a day. We also want to show the date, and as you can see the daytime is displayed in Unix timestamp, and we also want to show the main weather, which is rain, and that icon which we have seen in the previous video. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and so instead of prop we can extract these properties. So I'll remove this props, and in curly braces we can write dt, so we can keep the naming as it is in the JSON. So here we can say, we can simply say dt. Okay, so if you can see here is the dt, so we can keep the name same, so which is date time. Dt stands for date time, and then we can put temp min. So let's copy this, and temp max. Then we have main, then we have icon. Let's save this. So this component will receive these 5 properties, and we are going to display these 5 properties here. So here instead of saying card title, we can display the main weather. So this will be the card title, and instead of image, as you can see the source is this, but we need a different source. So let's go to the weather API, and if you click on API, and if you go to API docs, and if you scroll down, and if you click here, so this is the image URL which we want. So let's copy this image URL, and let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and instead of this source we will remove this, and we will paste the URL which we have copied, and let's put this in curly braces, and we need to use string interpolation. So let's remove this quotation, and let's add a backtick key, and here also we need to remove this quote, and we need to add a backtick key. We are using string interpolation because we have to overwrite this part of the URL, since 10d is this image. Okay, 10d is this image, but we have to get the icon which is written in the JSON. So we want to use the prop which is receive here. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and instead of 10d we can write dollar curly braces and icon, which is the name of the prop. Let's save this. Now as you can see we have the main, and we have the icon. Now we have to show date time and minimum and maximum temperature. So let's start with the date time. So we can simply use a paragraph to receive the date time. So this component receive the date time in milliseconds. So we have to create a date object here. Okay, so here we need to create a date object. So let's create it, const date, which is equal to, and we can use the date class constructor. So here we need to write new date, and in round brackets we need to write dt. So we have a date object here, and let's show the date here. So we can say date dot get full year, and then we can add a dash, and for the month we can write date dot get month, but the get month function actually counts from 0. So for January it will return 0. This is why we want to add 1, so plus 1. Now let's close this curly brace and put a dash here, and let's get the date for the current date. So let's add a curly braces, and then we can use date dot get date, and we need to call this function and close the curly braces. So this is how we can get the date. Let's save this file. Now let's show the minimum temperature. So here we need to add one more paragraph, and the minimum temperature is contained by temp underscore min properties. So here we need to write min means it is just a title minimum, and in curly braces we need to write temp underscore min. Let's save this file. Now let's copy this line and we can add the maximum temperature. So here we need to write max. Let's save this. Now as you can see, we have finished displaying all the properties. So we have date time, minimum temperature, maximum temperature, main and icon. So you can see here icon is here, main is here, date time is here, maximum minimum temperature and maximum temperature. Now we need to import this component in app.js. So let's go to app.js, and here we need to import this weather component, weather card component. So import weather card from dot slash components slash weather card, and here we need to display the weather card component. So here I will render the weather card component. So weather card, and let's close this. Now let's pass the property. As you remember the properties here, so we need to pass it in app.js. Okay, so we need to write it here, we need to write the properties here. So for date time we can write dt equals to curly braces, and let's go to the JSON file, and date time is this. So let's copy this and let's go back to Visual Studio Code and let's paste it here. But this date time is in Unix seconds and JavaScript uses milliseconds. So this is why we have to multiply this date time into 1000. We need to multiply this date time by 1000. Now let's add other properties as well. Let's add other properties. So let's go to weather component. Okay, so this is temp min. So let's copy this and let's paste it here, which is equal to what is the temperature. So this is the minimum. So let's copy this and paste it here. Then we have temp underscore max, which is equal to maximum temperature is 29.39. Then we have main and icon. So main equals to rain. So let's write rain, and icon, which is equal to 10d. Okay, so let's save this, and now we need to run this file. So npm start. So as you can see, we have displayed all the properties with the icon. Now we need this text should be in center. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and as you can see in let me close this. In app.css we have a class of app which is having text align center. So let's remove everything else. We don't require everything else, we only require this class. So let's copy this class, let's save this, and let's go to app.js, and here we need to add the class name which is equal to app. Let's save this, and now let's go back to the browser. Now as you can see, our text is in its center. So this is our first component, and we will be using this component to show the next 5 days weather. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. In this lecture, we want to enable the user to select the city which weather we are going to show. So we want to create a component where we will have an input and a button as well. And when the user clicks the button, we fetch the weather forecast for that city. So if we go to Bootstrap documentation, we will be using Bootstrap layout where we will have container, and we will have different rows which will go beneath each other, and in different rows we can define columns. So basically using this we can prevent writing a lot of CSS. Now let's create our next component. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and inside the component folder we will create a new file with the name city selector.js. So as this is a functional component, so I'll write RAFCE and press tab. And this component will take only one prop, which is called on select button click. So we will pass a function which will invoke when a button is clicked. This component will contain one state property, and that will be the city. So in order to use state in a functional component, we of course have to import use state. So here we will import use state. Now let's define our state. So use state, and the initial value will be null, and this use state will return an array which have two elements. So the first one will be the state variable, which we can name as city, and the second one is the setter function, so we can name it as set city. We need to assign it to a variable keyword, so const. And instead of div, we can take a React fragment. So we need to remove this div. So this is the React fragment. Now inside this, we are going to define a couple of rows. So let's define our first row. And our first row will be simple. It will just contain one column. So let's take one column, and this column we are going to store a text which will say the instruction for the user. So let's create an h1 tag, and let's say hello, select your city. Now we need to import the rows and column from React Bootstrap. So import row column from React Bootstrap. Let's save this. Now let's define the second row. So let's copy this code and paste it here. And the second row will also just contain one column, and this column will contain a form control component. So let's remove this, and here we need to write form control, and we need to import this form control from React Bootstrap. So here we need to write form control, and we can pass a couple of things to this form control, a couple of properties we will pass. The first one is placeholder, which is enter city, and let's pass on change handler. So on change equals to, and this will take an arrow function, and what we want to do is we want to call the set city function, and then new city will be city. So here we will pass an event, and we will call set city, which is going to be event dot target dot value. Let's save this. Now let's create the last row. So I have pasted this row which I have copied, and so instead of h1 tag, I'll be using button. So we need a button component, and we need to import the button component from React Bootstrap. And inside the button component, we will add a text which is check whether. Let's save this. And inside this button component, we need to pass a on click listener. So on click equals to, and we need to pass an arrow function. So what happens when the button is clicked? So when the user clicks this button, then we want to invoke the on select button click function, which is passed through props. So let's call this function on select button click, and we want to pass the current city. So city. As this is a functional component, so we can access the state variable city here. And now let's save this file, and now we need to import this component in app.js. So let's go to app.js, and let's import that component. So import city selector from dot slash component slash city selector, and let's remove this weather card component because we don't require it now, and let's render the city selector component. And let's remove this as well, and let's remove this weather card component from here also. Let's save this file. First we need to write the prop name. So on select, what is the prop name we need to see? So this is the prop name. We have not restructured it, so let's restructure. I forgot to do it. Let's copy this prop name, and here we need to write the prop name, which is equal to, and we are going to pass a function, so an arrow function, and we need to console dot log city. and here we need to pass city. Let's save this, and now we need to replace this div with a container, and here we need to import the container from React Bootstrap. Import container from React Bootstrap. Let's save this, and let's go to the browser. So as you can see, this is our city selector component. So let's do some styling. It is not looking that great. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and in app.js, we will write CSS for row. So dot row, and we will write the CSS property text center, sorry, text align center, and then in city selector.js, we are going to, for this column, we need to give XS equals to 4. Let's save this, and let's go to the browser. So let's refresh this. Still it is not in center. Let's go back to app.css. Okay, not text align center. It should be justify content center. Let's save this and let's go back. So as you can see, now it is in center, and we need the margin as well. So margin 15 px and 0. So now you can see it is looking much better. But what this XS4 means is that it means that it will take 1/3 of the total length. Okay. So if I remove this justify content center, let me remove this and let's save this. So as you can see, it takes 1/3 of the total length of this div, since 12 is the total. So 4 is the 1/4. Okay. So we can have 4 columns of 4 each, like 12. So we need only 1/3. So I have to XS equals to 4. Now let's go back and let's undo this. Let's refresh. Let's save and refresh, and let's come back here. Okay, now we need to inspect this, and let's go to the console, and then we need to enter the city name. So here I will enter the city name Mumbai, and let's click on this button. So once I click on this button, you can see we have console log Mumbai here. So it is working fine, and we have done some styling also. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. Now when we type the city here and click check whether the city will be console log. So this code is right here. We just console log the city which the user has typed, and then click the select button. Now we just console log the city which the user typed, and then click the check weather button. But what we want to do here is actually we want to fetch the weather from the current city from the API. In order to do that, we are going to use fetch hook, which we have written previously. But now let's write it again in this project too. So in source folder, let's create one more folder with the name hooks. And inside hooks folder, we need to create a file with the name usefetch.js, and I will write RAFCE and press tab. And here we need to pass the URL, and then we need to import use effect and use state from React. So use state and use effect. And then we need to create couple of state variables. So let's create them now. Let's create the data variable. So use state, and the initial value will be null, which will return an array. This use state will return an array with 2 elements. The first state variable will be, the first one is the state variable, which is data, and second is the setter function, which is set data. And we need to assign it to a variable keyword, so const. Let's create another use state function. So use state, and initial value will be null, and again this will return an array with 2 elements. So first the state variable will be error, and the setter function is set error, and we need to assign it to a keyword variable, so const. We need to make a variable for in progress, so I'll take use state function, and initial value will be false, and this will return an array with 2 elements. So the first is the state variable, which is in progress, and second is the setter function, so set in progress. and we need to assign it to a variable keyword, so const. Now let's create a use effect function. So here I'll create a use effect function, use effect, and we need to pass an anonymous function inside this, and then we need to call set in progress and set it to true because we are starting the fetch. So that is why we want to set the in progress to be true. Let's save this. So use effect, the spelling is incorrect. So use effect. And now let's call the fetch API. The fetch function takes a URL. We get the URL from the property. So let's pass the URL here and then we can get a response. First, we want to extract the body of response. We can do this by calling the JSON method. Then what we want to do is we want to set the data. So we get the data and so we get the data here and the body has been extracted. And first we want to set the in progress to be false. So set in progress and we need to set it to false. Since we have received our data and let's set the data to data. Let's save this. Then let's create a catch block as well in case we have an error. So let's call this property error and let's call set in progress again. So we need to extract set in progress and set it to false. And let's set error to error. Let's save this. So here we need to remove the semicolon and let's save this. And then now we want to return this state variable so it can be accessed by its user. So here we need to return. Let's remove this and we need to return this variable. So data error and in progress. Let's save this. Now let's go to app.js and we need to import the use fetch. So here I'll write import use fetch from dot slash hooks and slash use fetch. And here we need to extract the variables. So const and here we need to write data error and is progress, which is equal to use fetch. Let's save this file. So the current fetch is same what we did in our previous example when we learn about how to create our custom hook. But now this is not the exact behavior we want to do because what we did back is we just passed the URL here and that was it. But now what we want is we want to call the API every time this button is clicked and we want to call the API to get the weather for the new city. But I can't say use fetch and pass the URL. I can't say this since we want to store the data and run in progress as the state of app. So I can't put it in this scope, otherwise they will be gone. So what I can do is I have to modify this use fetch function. So let's go back to use fetch function and how do we modify this? First, we don't want to pass this URL. So we don't want to pass this URL now because now we don't know what the URL will be. We only want to call this use fetch when the button has been clicked. So basically we want to create a state variable for the URL. So first what I wanted to do is I wanted to modify this URL to initial URL. So initial URL. And now let's create the state variable for this URL. So here I'll create const and the state variable will be URL and the setter function will be set URL, which is equal to use state and the initial value will be initial URL. And now we need to modify the use effect function since this will be dependent on the URL of the state. So here I need to pass a second argument which is URL as a dependency. Now we need to export the set URL, so it can set from the outside, because when the URL is set, it will trigger the use effect to be run, and then we can fetch the API again. So what I can do here is I can say set URL, and let's save this file. So now I am exporting the set URL here, but now let's think how will the use effect work, because the first time URL might be null. So let's just put a check at the beginning of this effect. So if URL is null, then just simply return. So I don't want to fetch anything. Now let's go back to app.js, and here instead of console log city, just remove this, and I want to call set URL. And where the set URL came from? Set URL came from the use fetch. So set URL. And inside this, I will pass the URL. So what is the URL? So let's go back to the API, and this is the URL which we required. So let's copy this and let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and here, and I'll paste the URL here. But here I will add a backtick key because I want to do some string interpolation. So as you remember, we have exported the base URL and API key. So let's import this API key and base URL. So here I will write import API key and base URL from /config. Let's save this, and here instead of this URL, I will write dollar and curly braces base URL. And this API key, we need to remove this, and we need to write dollar API key. And one more thing we wanted to do is we want to change the city, because we don't want every time to fetch Mumbai. We want to fetch the weather from the city which the user has set. So here we need to remove this, and we need to add dollar and in curly braces city. Let's save this, and now let's console log data. So let's console log data. Let's save this, and let's go to the browser and check. So I'm getting some error in use fetch. So let's go to usefetch.js. So this condition should not come here, should come here after the use effect function. And now what is the issue? Use fetch is not defined. App.js. Here the spelling is wrong. So use fetch. Now let's go to the browser and let's inspect, and let's go to console. So if I type a city name Mumbai, and if I click, so here is the data which we are getting. So this is the response from the real API. So let's say if I modify and type it New York, and if I click on check weather, so you can see the data for New York. But why did it print it so many times? As you can see, it printed so many times. It printed 3 times because if I go to use fetch, we always modify many things. So when there is a response, we set in progress. And when this is set to true, just remember it will just trigger a state update. Not only here, but also in the user component here, which means that the data will be console log. So this is why you can see multiple console log, even though we just click the check weather one time. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. Now that we can see that we can download the data which is contained by the list property, we basically want to create 5 other cards and just populate the data. To do that, we are going to create a different component which will aggregate these 5 cards. So let's go to Visual Studio Code and create another component. So in component folder, we will create a new file with the name weather list.js. And as this is a functional component, so we will write RAFCE. And here we need to pass only one property, which is called weathers. And it will return a row. So we need to remove this div, and we will return a row, which we need to import from React Bootstrap. So import row from React Bootstrap. And inside the row, we want to create couple of columns. So we can map the weather array. So curly braces weathers dot map, and we want to map each element of this array. Each element of this weather array will contain these properties here. It will contain cloud, DT, main, so and so forth. So we want DT. So let's extract the DT here. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and here we need to write curly braces and we need to extract DT. Then we also want temperature. So inside main, we have temperature. So we want temp underscore max and temp underscore min, maximum temperature and minimum temperature. So here we need to write main, and then we need what we need. We need weather because this contains the icon and the description. So let's destruct weather as well. So let's go to Visual Studio Code, and here we will destruct weather, which is here. You can see this is the main and this is weather. So we need to destruct this. As we destruct main, we need to destruct weather also. And then what we want is we want to map each of this element. So we want to map each of this element with a column. So here we will add column. Here we need to add one more parenthesis, and here we need to close that. So this is how we can write an arrow function. So inside column, let's save this file. We need to close here. Okay. So inside the column, we need to add a component which is weather card. And as you remember, this weather card component will take couple of things. So we have to pass temp underscore min. So how do we know the min? So let's go to browser. Let's go to the browser. So here it is temp underscore min. Okay. So first we need to write main dot temp underscore min. Then we have max, which is equal to, and in the curly braces we will write main, and inside main we have temp underscore max. So dot temp underscore max. Then we wanted to pass dt, which is equal to datetime, and as you remember, this is Unix timestamp. So we want to multiply this dt by 1000 to make it millisecond. So where is dt? Here is the dt. So dt dot dt multiply by 1000. Then we want to pass the main description of the weather. So we can access this by calling weather property. So we can access this by calling weather property. So we can get the first item of the list. So let's say main equals to weather, and to access the first item, we need to put a square brackets and 0 dot main. Let's save this. And also we need the icon. So icon is also contained by weather property. So icon, which is equal to weather, and we need to access the first item. So in square bracket 0 and dot icon. Let's save this. Here we need to close the weather card component. Let's save this. So we have completed this weather list component. Now let's import this weather list component in app.js. So let's go to app.js and let's import this component. So import weather list from dot slash components slash weather list. And after city selector, we need to write a condition that if data exists, then render weather list component. So weather list. And here we need to pass the prop, which is weather equals to. So how do we access the weather? Well, we can say that list property contains that. So we can just say data dot list. Let's save this, and Okay, we need to define the column. So let's go to weather list component, and here we need to define the column. We need to import the column from React Bootstrap. Weather card is not defined. Let's go to app.js. One second, let's go to weather list. Okay, here we need to import weather card component. So import weather card from dot slash weather card. Let's save this file and let's go to the browser and check. So let's refresh this, and here we need to write Mumbai. So as you can see, we got the cards, but they are not looking good. Let me close this. Okay, we are getting some extra stuff. So I need to check this. So the count is too much. It is around 40. So we need to make the count to 5. So here we need to write and CNT equals to 5. Okay. After the city, we need to write and CNT 5. And if we save this file, and if we go back to the browser, and if I type Mumbai, and if I click on check weather, so you can see we can get 5 cards, and the width is not okay. So we need to open weather card component, and here we need to remove the width. And let's save this, and let's go back to the browser, and here we need to type Mumbai, and let's save this. So now you can see the cards are looking much better, and it is looking much nicer. So this is it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello friends, welcome back. Now let's add some tweaks to our application. So first, let's use the is in progress state variable. Since you can see it doesn't say anything. So what we can do here is basically we can go back to our application, and we need to come to app.js, and here we need to remove the console log. So let's create a function, and let's name it as get content, and this will be an arrow function. So this function will be responsible to return the HTML for all the content which is below city selector. So what we can do now, so we can say if there is an error, then let's return an h2 tag which says error when fetching. And we can print, and we can also print the error object here as well. So error. Let's save this file. So here instead of round brackets, we need curly braces. So let's save this file. So now we can say that if there is no data and is progress is through, then we can return an h2 tag which says loading. So the users know that the fetching is still in progress. Then we can say that if there is no data, then return null. So basically there is nothing which displays here. Otherwise we can return our weather list component which is here. So let's copy this and paste it here. And instead of this line of code, we can just call the function which is get content. Let's save this file, and now let's go to the browser and let's type Mumbai, and you will see is loading. So we are not able to see the loading because so here you can see we are not able to see the loading. Here it should come print loading because here the spelling is mistake. It should be in progress. Okay, I have done a mistake in spelling because here if you can see in use fetch it is in progress. So we have exported this variable, but the name which I wrote here is progress, but the correct one is in progress. Okay. Now the spelling is also wrong, error. So let's save this. Now if I go back to the browser and if I type Mumbai, you will see loading first and then the data. So you just saw that loading, and then the data, it fetched the data. Now let's see what happened if I type New York. Okay, so if I type New York, so what happened if I fetch the data from of New York. So you won't be able to see the loading here. Let's see. Okay. So if I click, so as you saw that there was no loading text and even it did not disappear. Okay. So why did it happen? So it happened because if we come back to use fetch component. So when the URL state property changes, React will call our effect function and state in progress will be set it to true. But only we want to set the in progress to be true, but we also want to clear the previous error and data. So now let's call set data and set it to null. And even I want to clear the error, so let's call set error and set it to null. Now let's save this application and let's go to the browser. Now let's check Mumbai. Okay, so let's check the weather for Mumbai. If I click, you can see loading and then the data has been fetched. And now if I type New York and if I click on check weather, so you will see this will disappear. And you saw a loading for a moment as well. Now let's see what happened if I put something weird, something which is not related to the city. So let me type something which is not related to the city and let's click check weather. So we got an error. So let's inspect. Okay, so we got an error saying that cannot read property map of undefined. So what happened here is basically we got 404. So when we pass weather to this component, so when we call weather list and pass data dot list, basically data won't have a list property. So what I want to do now is I have to come back to use fetch component and this API when it finds invalid city it will return 404 which does not go to the catch block but it still come to the 10 block. So what I want to do here is if the data dot cod is greater than or equal to 404, sorry, it's 400, then I want to set error, then I can do data dot message, then I can return. But before returning, I have to move set in progress in front of this. So the progress will disappear. Now let's save this and let's come back to the browser and let me close this. Let me refresh it and let's check again. If I type Mumbai and if I click on weather, check weather, you can see the data has been loaded. And now if I put some weird city and if I click on check weather, you can see we got an error, city not found. And if I type Mumbai again, you can see the data of Mumbai. And there are a couple of more issues. Here the spelling is incorrect of max and we can't see the value because the name of the prop is incorrect. So let's go to Visual Studio Code and these are the name of props min and max which we need to pass in weather card component. So here I need to pass min and max. So the name were incorrect. So this is it and now here I need to type max because the spelling was incorrect. Let's save this and here also we need to write min and here I need to write max because the props name are min and max. Let's save this and let's go to the browser and let me refresh this. Now let's type the city name Mumbai. Let's check weather. Now you can see we can see the value of minimum temperature and maximum temperature. And there is one more issue. Let me inspect it. And let's go to console. Here you can see that each child in the list should have a unique key prop. So let's go to Visual Studio Code and let's go to weather list. And here we need to pass a key. So we'll pass index as a key. So let's pass key which is equal to index. Let's save this and let's go to the browser and check. So now you can see we were getting a warning of key prop. So now it is gone. So this is it. We have finished building our weather application. As you can see, we have not written any ES6 class component. We used only custom React hook. We just use only functional component. And this was an example how to build a weather application using functional component with React hooks. So this is the end of this course. I hope you learn a lot and found it useful. If you want to learn more about React hooks, I would recommend checking out the official website where other built-in hooks are also listed. So you can find the source code of this project in project tab. So this is it, and I'll see you in some other lectures and some other course. Till then, take care and bye bye.